Hi, my name is Matthew Huynh.
My name is Mahima Iyer.
And my name is Ashley Chan. Today we're going to be talking about Shakespearean fashion.
Laws made an impact on what people in the Elizabethan time period wore. The law had very strict rules for what women could or could not wear.
There were restrictions on what fabric and materials can be used to make the clothes. Women in high-class societies were only allowed to spend £100 a year, which is about 131 US dollars. Duchesses, countesses, and marquises were only allowed to have clothing made out of fur, tissue, and silk. Aristocratic class were the only people allowed to wear satin, silk, or fabric mixed with pearls, gold, and silver. Fabric with velvet, lace, and fur on the dresses made out of silver or gold were restricted for wealthy classes. If the gowns had chains, buttons, aglets, and borders were only allowed to be worn by the upper classes as well. Silk ribbon, wool, cotton, or kirtles of stain were reserved for women who were wives of sons of the knights' heirs, or people who could buy property, and their daughters. Another major law was meant for the upper class woman, not to outshine the queen. The queen wanted to be the center of attention, so she did not want anyone looking better than her. Hierarchy played a big role in Shakespearean fashion. People had to dress according to their social status. The hierarchy was organized in this order. First, it was the monarchs. Second class was the nobility. Third class was the gentry. Fourth class was the merchants. Fifth class was the mannery. And lastly, at the bottom were the laborers. People on the top of the hierarchy wore much nicer clothing than people at the bottom. Queen Elizabeth liked to dress to impress. She was a fashion icon, her and her father. However, she outdid her father. Queen Elizabeth wore dresses of all colors, but black, white were her favorite colors. White and black represented virginity and purity. The queen's dress would be beautifully hand-sewed with different types of colored threads and decorated with diamonds, rubies, sapphires, and all kinds of jewels. The queen would usually wear chemises, which were women loose-fit undergarments, which were tightened up by iron or wood. Also, she would wear a fethingle. A fethingle is a petticoat of fabric around the hips. It is what they used back then for women's dresses to extend the skirt and form a shape. The queen also wore a gown, stockings, sleeves, and neck and wrist ruffles. To complete her look, the queen wore accessories such as a fan and jewelry. She always never was fully dressed without her makeup. The early years she wore very little to no makeup, but after she got smallpox in 1562, she wore quite a lot of makeup to cover her scarring. When the queen were to ever be outside, she would wear velvet cloths, gloves made out of cloth or leather. During the warmer weather, she would wear hats to shelter her pale face from the sun. Different types of clothing were also based on gender. We are first going to start off with what the high-class men wore.
High-class men wore some form of woolen hose or stockings under codpieces or trunk hose. The most popular out of these over time was trunk hoses, which is basically just underwear. On top of their undergarments, men wore button-down shirts. They also wore doublets, which are close-fitted jackets. In the bottom, they wore pants and breeches. Breeches are just capri-style pants. Knee-length breeches with a fly opening became more popular towards the later stages of the Elizabethan era. To add flair to their breeches, they put vertical slashes and pots of color. The more expensive breeches were made of silk, satin, velvet, leather, and other silks. An accessory that was gender neutral were the ruffs. They did not have any design on them. They just simply covered the neck. Ruffs got bigger and bigger as the Elizabethan age went on. They also put ruffs on the wrists of sleeves sometimes. Another accessory upper-class men wore are flat hats, Italian bonnets, or felt tall hats. Elizabethan men didn't leave the house without their coats. They used to wear sleeveless jackets on top of regular jackets called jerkins, usually made of leather, depending on the class. In the colder seasons, men would wear cloaks, capes, and coats. Men usually preferred leather on these as well because of their ability to withstand rain. Upper-class men would just add velvet accents on panels to their coats.
Now moving on to high-class women.
A fashionable Elizabethan woman's wardrobe was complex. Clothing in the Elizabethan era was based off of geometric shapes rather than the female body. The female clothing had two main layers, the undergarments and the overclothes. For the undergarments, women would wear smocks, stockings, or hose, a corset or bodice, a farthingale, a roller rowley, a stomacher, a petticoat, a kirtle, a forepart, and a partlet. For their overclothes, women would wear a gown, separate sleeves, ruffs, cloak, shoes, wings, stomachers, and a hat. Ruffs were worn around the neck by both men and women. Wings hid the ties that connected the sleeves to the waistcoat. Bodices made the ribcage look smaller. Waistcoats were blouses with laces that held up a petticoat. Chemises were long shirts that were also worn in bed as a night shirt. Stomachers were V-shaped inserts that covered the bodice. Rolls were padded rolls that women would wear around their waist. The farthingale was an underskirt with bone or wooden hoops. Petticoats were worn over a chemise.
The middle class had very basic choice for fashion.
Since options were limited, men and women basically wore the same things. For the lower portion, they both wore shirts, breeches, trunks, and Venetian hoses. For the upper portion, they both wore doublets with sleeves, jerkins, and stockings. As a bonus piece of clothing, men wore capes. Breeches were made of a finer wool. It had a more trim look, and it resembled the upper class's styles. Compared to the upper class, they had more darker colors in their clothing because the bright colors were only for the rich.
Doublets had metal buttons and the sleeves were attached. If the sleeves weren't, then the attachment would be hidden. On the doublets, decorative slashing and embroidery were recommended. There was an option to have epaulets on the shoulder, but it was kept to a minimum.
The jerkin was a sleeveless jacket worn over a regular doublet. It was made of wool, but occasionally it would be made from leather. That's it. Stockings were like socks, and they were made of fine knit cotton or wool stocking. Middle-class men would wear capes to create the impression of a respectable man. The capes were made of colored wool or velvet. Sometimes men would be extra and add a fur collar.
The lower class people were the peasants, servants, market people, and the beggars. They would wear aprons, fitted sleeves, and partlets or neck clothes. They couldn't afford clothes with designs and decorations, so they would wear bland clothes designed to look like one piece. The materials of their clothes would be wool and muslin because obviously they couldn't afford the nice stuff like silk. They had to stick to the colors red, blue, green, and brown, and also yellow. The reason why was because the dye for those colors were cheap. Natural plants were used to get those colors. Blue was the most common because it was the cheapest to get.
Hierarchy in the 21st century. Introducing the lower class.
Introducing the middle class.
Last but not least, introducing the high class.
The ideal look for a high-class woman in Elizabethan era was a woman with light hair, snowy white complexion, complemented with red lips and cheeks. An immediate indication for a high-class woman was if she was pale, because a low-class woman would get suntans from working outside. Another benefit from having pale face was that it hid aging. Women would use ceruses as makeup. Ceruses was white lead mixed with vinegar. The pale complexion was desirable that women would use ceruses even if it was poisonous. Of course, poisonous makeup caused severe skin damage, so they had many remedies to fix spots, blemishes, and acne.
They used lemon water to rose water to even mercury as facial treatments. Anyway, women also applied face paint, which was made from plant roots and leaves called fucus. It came in a variety of reds, mainly used on lips and cheeks. Madder, cochineal, and ochre-based compounds were all used as blush and lip color, but vermilion mercuric sulfide was the most popular choice. For eye makeup, women used belladonna in their eyes to get the desired sparkle. Then they applied kohl to darken the eyelashes, kind of like mascara. Brows were heavily plucked to achieve a high arch. They also used to pluck their hair to push their hairline back. A high forehead was very fashionable back then. Elizabethan women wore so much makeup that an artist didn't need paints. They just needed a fashionably painted lady standing nearby for pigments. After an Elizabethan lady had achieved pale skin and sparkling eyes, the next thing to receive attention was hair. Pale hair was the most desirable, and so many people sought out recipes for bleach. Although none of these dyes or mixtures were safe, and many were poisonous. Many recipes seemed to contain urine as a key ingredient. Other women chose to give their hair a yellow look with a mixture of saffron, cumin seeds, celandine, and oil. For those who could not lighten their hair, there were wigs. Many women in higher classes would wear wigs instead of exposing their scalps to toxic dyes. The most fashionable hairstyle for women was to curl their hair in the front and put them in rolls along the sides of their head. Other hairstyles included buns, which were for married women, long flowing hair for young women, and frizzy hairstyles. Hairstyles for men were equally important to hairstyles for women. The fashionable length varied. It started as closely chopped hairstyles, and over the Elizabethan era, the length increased. Long hair was required to be curly. Men would curl their hair with hot irons and use wax or gum to keep it in place, much like hairspray. It was also fashionable for men to keep beards during the era. Most ordinary people could not afford jewelry. Only wealthy men and women who attended the courts of the kings or queens or wealthy merchants could afford these things. Both men and women wore jewelry. Men wore rings, long chains around their necks, pendants, and even jeweled earrings. Women also wore rings on every finger, even their thumbs, as well as bracelets and necklaces. Widespread exploration and trade made a variety of precious jewels available to the wealthiest people. Some of these jewels included diamonds, rubies, emeralds, topaz, and sapphires. The most common cut in the 16th century was the cabochon cut, which is a jewel with its top cut off, creating a smooth surface. Other pieces of jewelry included brooches, single jewels, buttons, agelets, billements, girdles, and rosaries.
Lastly, no one left the house without shoes.
Shoes were made out of stout or fine leather for the lower class and made out of silk and velvet for the upper class. High heels were created during the end of the era and only nobility wore them. Shoes could also be slipped on or fastened with ribbons or laces. Sometimes shoes were decorated with trims, embroidery, or jewels. Some shoe styles include boots, which were made of leather, gamache, which are high boots, buskins, which are calf length, startups, pumps, chop-ines, clogs, corked shoes, galoche, pantofle, and pinsons.
That is all the information we collected on the fashion of the Elizabethan era, and we hope you enjoyed our video. And these are our bloopers. Have fun. And finally, this would be the high class. Can I get a what? Hey, you were supposed to do it yet.
So bad. Everything woman. Matthew.
What? Wait.